Welcome back to Educator.com. This is the lesson on ecosystems. Please keep in mind before I begin that this is somewhat of a review of ecosystems because this should have been covered when you took biology, hopefully as somewhat of a prerequisite for doing AP Environmental Science. If you need a refresher on ecosystems and the terms associated with it, because I didn't go into enough detail or give enough examples in this particular lesson, you can always look back at the general biology lessons featured on Educator.com to look that over, and it would be under ecology. So, in terms of ecosystems, here's some key terms. What is an ecosystem? Well, it's many species of organisms interacting with each other and their environment. So it's really taking into account different populations of different species, which together would form a community, and the community of all those interacting species taking into account abiotic factors, temperature, precipitation, latitude, longitude, all those things. You get different ecosystems from that. The community effect. Populations impact each other's sizes. This makes sense. If you have organisms that are relying on others for energy in terms of eating them, you're going to have these populations impacting each other. And there's a term, keystone species. This would be the species in a food web, which I'll cover more in a bit, that has a disproportionate impact on the rest of the organisms. So the keystone species may not be the most abundant. It may not have, the greatest importance because the most of any species is that one. No. It's just that if we were to remove all those individuals from the food web, they would have a disproportionately large impact on the rest. Now, oftentimes that's, it could be a secondary consumer or tertiary consumer, some kind of carnivore. But yeah, they're very important to the success of the whole system in terms of keeping different populations in check. Oftentimes, in a aquatic or oceanic ecosystem, you'll see Possessor, which is a genus name of a kind of sea star, this kind of echinoderm. Possessor, a genus name, so there's Possessor giganteus. There's a lot of different Possessor species, but if you remove sea stars from an ecosystem or community that's like intertidal, it could be very damaging. The biodiversity tanks, and it's kind of all out of whack because they weren't there. Sometimes it's wolves, and I'll give you an example later on in this course about how wolves can be a keystone species. So with ecosystems, you have a cycling of chemical elements and a flow of energy from the bottom all the way up to the top, and it goes back. So we'll talk about that, about autotrophs, heterotrophs, producers and consumers. So producers, also known as autotrophs, they are responsible for getting energy into the system. Most often on Earth, we're talking about organisms that absorb sunlight and do photosynthesis to create organic compounds. But you even have what are called chemoautotrophs instead of the photoautotrophs, which would be using light. Chemoautotrophs, an example could be bacteria at the bottom of the ocean that are never exposed to sunlight, so they can't rely on getting energy into the ecosystem that way. They may use hydrothermal vents with different gases coming out from under the crust and using those inorganic gases to make food. And then you have something that eats the chemoautotroph and so on and so forth up the chain. Consumers, they are consuming energy from outside of themselves. Heterotrophs, they're relying on another organism. It could be plant life. If we're talking about a consumer that's an herbivore, it could be relying on animal life. So that would be a carnivore, or both. An omnivore would be us, for instance. And I have a picture here drawn by Ernst Haeckel. It's a lot of different photosynthetic organisms. So these would all be considered photoautotrophs because they are making food with light. And of course, carbon dioxide and water too.